So I can see we still have some people joining us, but we are at the top of the hour and therefore I will begin. Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for being here for Reality Check. Are your integrations really plug and play? So what are we going to be doing here today? We've already confirmed that the screen is being shared correctly, and just so that all of you know, this session is being recorded for posterity. Today we're going to be talking about what Compatibility Check is, what it can do, and how you can get involved. Reading out the slides there. It's going to be a quick couple of slides, then we're going to have a live demo and finish up with some Q&A. And I'm going to be your host through this. My name is Ian Weddell, and I'm the Program Manager in charge of Compatibility Check here at IMS. So how did we get here? Why do we need Compatibility Check and what's it doing? Well, whether you're a district or a supplier, Compatibility Check is about making standards work for you. For districts, it's about answering that question of, will this work? Whether you're using OneRoster for your rostering or whether you're working with common cartridges, are they going to behave the way you expect? Is the data you're sending to your vendor the data you think you should be sending to your data? Is there the transparency there that you need? Are you understanding everything about what's happening? Are their needs clear to you? When you send your file to them, are you including the metadata that they need? We can answer those questions for you and help you know what you need to do to be digital on day one. For suppliers, obviously, this is really good for making standards work for you. You can save time and improve your onboarding experience by telling people what they need to do ahead of time using Compatibility Check's OneRoster check functionality. You can also see compatibility before onboarding. Give your onboarding team a helping hand, as it were, by letting them see that data, see the shape of the data that you'll be getting from a district, and before it gets into your system. And with the next release, which will be coming out in the very near future, you'll be able to actually run characterizations yourself, much as the districts do today. And that means suppliers will be on the same footing. They'll be able to take data from any district that's working with them, run it through this tool and see how it will compare against their product, see if there are any issues with it, and understand what's happening, really, so that all of you have a good understanding of your data, what it is you're sharing, and will it work. So now we get into the larger part of this. It's a live demonstration, so bear with me while I hop over to the application. What you'll be looking at today is our staging environment. This is the latest version of our code. This is the new software that will be deployed next week. So you're getting a good sneak preview here. And I'll just log us in. So Compatibility Check from IMS Global is made up of a number of features, and we're going to work through these today during this demo. First off, we have OneRoster Check. OneRoster Check is where you'd come if you're using the OneRoster specification, specifically OneRoster version 1.1, and that's for REST or CSV. And what you can do within OneRoster Compatibility Check is verify that your files are conformant. First off, is the output that you're generating from your SIS or are those REST credentials really providing the standard the way that you expect it should be? But then it goes beyond that and tells you what you're sharing. How are you populating those fields? And what does that information mean to you? Once you're convinced that the information you're sharing is the information you want to be sharing and that it's formatted correctly, you can go that step further and compare it against vendor products. So now not only do you know that your data is prepared, but you can answer that question of, will this work, with a vendor product before you even pick up the phone to talk to them. This is very exciting. I'll walk you through this now. So from your dashboard, you get a good overview of what's happening. You can see that the two keywords I'm going to repeat a lot today are characterizations and comparisons. Characterizations, that investigation of your own data. Comparisons, comparing your characterization against a vendor's product. So to be able to compare, you've got to have a conformant file. Makes sense. So we give you quick overviews. How many are ready to compare? How many characterizations have you run in total? And then how many comparisons have you run? Obviously, looking at all of this, you've got to go, right, first step, I need to create a characterization. I need to investigate my own data. And the way we do that is by clicking characterizations. We've got a few in here already, but first off, I want to show you how easy it is to run a characterization. Click Add New. You can then give it a color. Why a color, you say? Well, maybe you're using different filters, and you want to filter, use the color to say, this is this filter, this is that filter. Maybe you want to organize them by year and use a different color each year. Really, it's up to you. It's there to let you make that characterization something you can remember. Next, identify the specification you're going to be using. As I said earlier, right now, OneRoster Compatibility Check works with OneRoster version 1.1 CSV and REST for rostering. For this case, we're going to do a CSV rostering. Give it a name. Again, this is just to help you understand what it is that you've got there when you see it in a list. Then we get to a little bit of information that really helps all of us in the community understand what's going on. We ask you to identify where the file is coming from. So here I'm using a test file, but you can see we have a long list of SISs that are very familiar in the marketplace. Please tell us what you're using, and if you don't see what you're using in this list, select Other and tell us. This helps us understand how the specification is being used across the broader community, how SISs are implementing it, and IPASs and third parties are implementing it, and it really helps us identify trends and make the specification better for everyone. You can then enter some notes. What kind of notes might you enter? Well, maybe this is your first run of the year and you're just doing it to see what happens. Put that in there. Maybe you've been told by your SIS vendor that there's been a software update and you're just running a check to make sure nothing's changed. Or maybe you're working with a new vendor and they've asked for you to filter your information a different way. All that kind of thing you could put in here, so when you come back to look at the characterization later, you'll know what it was you'd done that time around. It's really up to you. Now, with CSVs, it's quite easy to do. You either have the file hosted somewhere on the internet, give us the URL, the username and password, and away you go, or you can upload the file. But before we get into that, I'm just very quickly going to note this yellow bar at the bottom. Uploaded or accessed data is not retained by Compatibility Check, and all files are deleted at the end of the characterization. This is something very important to remember. If you've never sat in one of these demos before, if you've never seen Compatibility Check before, it's important to note. We are not a data transformation tool. We're not a data retention or a data manipulation service. What we're doing is we're going to look at your data briefly, analyze it, then delete your data. We only keep the analysis. We're keeping that unique fingerprint we generate of your data, and it's that we use in comparisons. So once you've said you're going to upload a file, pick the file you want to use. Here's one I prepared earlier. And then it's as easy as clicking the big green easy button. We really worked hard to make it very simple and fast for districts to be able to characterize their data, because we know you want to get the answer of will this work, but you don't want to have to learn a big complicated tool to get there. Here you can see a successful run. On the left-hand side, we're seeing the information that we typed in earlier, the name that we gave it, who we are, that color that we were talking about, any notes, that information, what it was we did and when we did it. In the middle here, you're seeing an overview, and this is really telling you at the very high level, particularly with CSVs, how did things go? And you're seeing each of the files with an amber check. We've used a traffic light metaphor throughout Compatibility Check. Red, you have an issue. Amber, there are things we want you to be aware of, but you're okay. Green, absolutely fine. And what you'll find is that most of the time you'll be seeing amber check marks. This means your information is conformant, but there are things within it we found that we think you should be aware of. On the right-hand side, you'll find actions that you can take to expand or collapse the report or compare against other products. But what's in the report? Let's take a look. If we start at the bottom and expand users, because this is CSV, we can tell you the field names and their positions within the spec and give you that very easy structure that you've created. Then we can get to the information within the report that really gives you that extra value. We're not just telling you the specification again, whether it's required, the format it is, but we're also telling you how you're populating it, the minimum and maximum field lengths that we found. And this can be very useful for you for troubleshooting or checking information. For example, down here, we can see given name, shortest length was 3, longest was 7, and it was consistently populated. So you can see you've supplied this in every single record you've provided to the vendor, and the shortest was 3, longest was 7. How can this help you? We heard from a lot of districts that they work with vendors that had older systems that couldn't cope with long string lengths, and maybe they had a 64-character cap. Here, you could very quickly come in and see if anything exceeded that limit before sending them the file, before getting anything cut up or concatenated in unexpected ways. You're also seeing the amber checks. And these amber dots that we're seeing are telling us that there's something we want you to be aware of. And what it is highlighted in the row. So in this case, several of the fields were never populated. So in this sample file, no email addresses were ever provided for any of the users. Now, this may be okay within your environment, but this also might be a red flag for you, telling you that your data is not quite coming out the way you think it should be, and guiding you to go and check within your SIS to find out what's happening. Let's look at some other examples. Here in orgs, you can see a new color, blue. Here we're telling you that this is suggested metadata. Within OneRoster CSV, there are suggested metadata fields that you may include. And in this case, you can see they've been included. Some are consistently populated, some are inconsistently populated. Now, what's exciting about this is you get this kind of breakdown. And what I'll do is I'll come out and take you back to that list screen, whether you're looking at a CSV or at a REST example. Here's a REST example from earlier. Now, obviously with REST, we're not talking files, we're talking collections and endpoints. And so you'll see each of the broad collections described with the check marks, as you saw with CSV. But then as we drill into it, you get a higher definition of detail. We're telling you where we got this information from, the host name, the source that it was given to us, and what security we were asked to test against. Then, as we dig into it, you can see for each collection, we interrogate every single individual endpoint, and we'll give you collection sizes and sample sizes. The reason for this is with REST, obviously, we can call individual records or we could call entire data sets. But unlike with CSV, where you've uploaded the entire file to us, if we were to call your entire data set, it would be a lot of calls, could look like a denial of service attack. We try not to do that. So what we do instead is we take a sample. If you've only got 300 records or less, we're going to look at the whole lot. That's not too many to call for. But over 300, when you're talking thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands students, for example, we can see that broad collection size, but we take samples from the beginning, middle, and end of your data set to create that overarching view without continuously bombarding your system. Again, we have this drill down metaphor. You can keep digging in for more and more information. And here's something interesting that you're going to see that's triggering one of these alerts. When we ran this, the security profile that we used was OAuth1 SHA-256. This is actually specified within OneRoster v1.1 REST as required. Everybody's got to meet that. They also have an optional support of OAuth2. But we don't just check the thing that you told us to use. We're also checking for other security profiles that may cause problems. And in this case, we detected that the endpoint also supported the deprecated security protocol OAuth1 SHA-1. Now, you might not know this. This may not be a problem between you and your vendor. If your vendor's just using SHA-256, you're set up for that. Everything's working great. But you might want to tell your sys vendor that they're supporting a deprecated protocol. We also check to see if no security is used. That would be a big problem, as you can imagine. Scrolling down, much like with the CSV, we give you a breakdown of all the data we got back. Because it's REST, these don't come with a nice position numbering because it's coming in the data set as it is returned. However, we give you a similar overview, the field names, whether they're required or not by the specification, or identifying them as metadata if they're metadata, and then giving you that minimum maximum field length and the population consistency. And this is really useful with REST because unlike with CSV, where it might be possible for you to open up that zip file and look at the CSV files inside, open them up in something like Excel and be able to visually, manually check the data. With REST, because of the system APIs, it can be hard for you to check that these things are working. Compatibility Check and OneRoster Check gives you an easy way to see what a vendor system will see when they call your credentials. And this can be really useful for your data transparency. Are you oversharing information? Are you including metadata you don't intend to? You can see it straight away here. Obviously, though, we've looked at two happy paths there. Both of those were amber checks. What happens if you get a red result? Well, here's an example we made earlier of a red CSV. You get a similar experience with REST. Obviously, with CSV, you're normally expecting 7 or 8 files. They should all be there with those nice check marks. Here you can see we've stopped at 4. The reason for that is that with CSV in particular, as I said earlier, we have your entire data set. So we can do a lot of cross-referencing and cross-checking within it. However, if we identify certain critical errors, we're going to realize we can't carry on those checks. And at a certain point, we say, right, We've identified so many critical errors, we need to address these before we can move on. And that's why you might see a shorter list like this. But what kind of errors are we identifying? This one's my all-time favorite. It's really obvious, but you'd be surprised it can happen by accident very easily. An entire column is missing from the CSV file. The start date header is not there. Now, it might just be that that header row is incorrectly created by your SIS, or it might be that entire column's missing. We can't tell for certain, but we can tell you if that column's not there, there's a problem. And if we're not seeing that header, there's an issue going on. That's going to cause us a fairly serious error, hence that red exclamation point. It gives you a good understanding of what you need to do as well. Go find out if in your configuration, have you accidentally set something to turn that off, or work with your sys vendor to find out why it's not appearing in the files. Now let's look at another one. Here's one that we've seen quite often. If you're using subjects and subject codes, they're from an enumerated list and they need to match. This is something that we're currently working on, and you'll see with profiles in the next release, and you actually won't see this error coming up in the future as we're working to allow you to have flexibility within subject codes. But what you'll see here is that because they didn't match, we've identified that invalid enumeration. If you see that, your options are, well, it's an optional field within the file. You might say, my vendor doesn't really need this. I'm going to exclude it and filter it from the file. Or you can go in and make sure that they match correctly. Or, as we'll see in upcoming releases, you can select a profile that doesn't check this because you're using customized subjects or customized subject codes to meet state requirements, for example. In demographics, another error, and you can see all of these errors are very specific. We're giving you actionable steps with them. In this case, the header public school resident status is in position 17. It should be in 16. It's a CSV file. The columns have to be in that correct order. We know what that order is. We can identify when the headers are not in that order and alert you to it. So we're always trying to give you actionable steps to make sure your data is in the best shape possible for sharing with your vendors and then making sure that things work smoothly. So let's go back to the beginning here and say, okay, we're looking at our dashboard. We've just run that demo. We've got a good check. What could we do now? Well, if anyone was watching closely when we were looking in this report, you'll notice there was a compare button here. As this was a successful characterization, we can compare straight away with products within Compatibility Check that meet this specification. So they'd have to be 1.1 CSV and rostering. And here I could see them straight away. And if there was a product I knew I wanted to work with, I can click on it here and launch from this point. This is great if you already know the vendor that you want to work with, or if your vendor has said, hey, we're in Compatibility Check, please could you go in and run a characterization, compare against us, show us the results. And to show them results, you simply click the share button. At that point, when you create the report, the vendor will see a copy of the report. But don't worry, you don't have to share the report with your vendors. So if you're looking for a new vendor, or if you're just running some tests and want to see what happens, you don't need to share this information. They don't know that you've run these comparisons until you click that share button. If you do share, you can always change your mind by looking at the report, and I'll show you that in a moment. But that's the easy way there, if you know the product that you want to use. But what if you don't know the product, or you're looking for other ideas? Who could we work with? We've got this great conformant OneRoster information. Who could we be working with? Well, we've built in a product catalog into Compatibility Check, and this will be populated with products from vendors participating in the initiative. Here, because we're in our staging environment, you can see it is all fake data. In our live environment, we have a number of vendors working with us, and we're adding more all the time. For suppliers working with us like this, they get the benefits of not just being able to run characterizations like we just saw and see how their customers' data is structured, making sure it's looking good to work with them. They also have the ability to model their products. And by modeling, basically, they create their own fingerprint. And once that's ready, they make it available and it would show up in these lists. What does that mean? Well, it means they've added all the information. Do they require certain metadata? Are there notes or common issues that they see that they'd want you to know about? They can put all of that into their model so that when you compare against it, you see it straight away. While looking through the products here, you can see you could select a specific supplier. If there was somebody that you knew you wanted to work with, maybe you already have an ongoing relationship with them. You can also filter by the format. So if you are just using CSV, you could say, I only want to see products that are just CSV. Or if you're looking for something to work with and you're not sure what it is, we've built fuzzy search in here. So even if I misspell science, it knows what we're looking for. Lots of different ways of finding products to compare against, but how hard it is to compare. Click the compare button. Now, if you're coming from a characterization, you'll remember the left-hand side was filled out. You had to select a product for the right-hand side. Here, because we're coming from the product catalog, you see it from the reverse side. You now have to select which characterization you want to use. And we want to use our demo characterization. And we'd enter that in here. But just for the sake of this, we'll go and do it the even easier way. Hit compare. Select that advanced science we were just looking at. Hit the big green easy button. And what we're doing now is comparing that characterization we ran earlier against the advanced science characterization of that product model. And we can see it's incompatible. Now, this is good to know. We can see, using that traffic light metaphor, green checks, amber checks, and those red exclamation points. And I'll take you through what that means. Because in the comparison, we're not looking at the specification, we're looking at your data and that supplier's data needs. So first off, we see a little bit of information from the vendor. We can see that they've given us links to their documentation, their online help, and also notes about how the file set should be prepared. This is overarching information. But then we get into the meat of the report and we see the real issues and the real concerns. Green check marks, you meet this vendor's needs exactly. There is nothing in there that they can tell you. There are no additional notes. But now that amber check mark, we're used to this idea by now. We look through a lot of green, but there's an amber alert. And what is it? We're seeing it's a piece of metadata that we had within that zip file we characterized earlier. We can tell it's our metadata because we have the P flag. We are providing this information. And the alert is that we've included a custom metadata field, but it's not used by this consumer. This supplier hasn't included this metadata in their model. You're oversharing. So we're telling you that up front. Doesn't mean it's not going to work. Check with the vendor, it should work fine. But now you know that you're oversharing. Maybe you want to modify your filter to not include that metadata, or you know to check with the vendor and say, hey, we're including this additional information. Is it going to be a problem for your platform? I expect we're going to see similar issues with these other checks. Okay, demographics. In this case, the file's not been modeled by the consumer. Their product doesn't use demographics.csv. You've included the file in your zip file. They've not asked for it. It's not in their model. And so now you know you're sharing a lot of information that you don't need to include. You could exclude demographics.csv from their zip, and this product would still work. Let's go check out this red issue. This is the one that's going to stop us from working with this supplier until we can resolve it. We come in, we're seeing a lot of green check marks. And that's good to know. But then right down at the end here, we can see, very similar to what we had earlier, there's a flag, but this time it says consumer, not provider. In this case, the supplier is asking for, as the consumer of this data, a specific piece of metadata. They've said it's optional. We can tell that by the icon there. These icons are identified at the top. It's an optional field, but because we're talking CSV, the field heading must be included within the file. So we can say straight away, a suggested metadata field that's used by this consumer is not provided in the characterized dataset. You need to include it. So now, as a district or as the provider of the information, you know you need to go and make sure that that metadata is included to work with this vendor as they've defined. And that's really how comparison reports work. As you remember earlier, I said if you want to share these with the vendor, you can do by simply toggling the share icon. If you want to remove it, maybe there was an error and you're going to work on fixing it, turn it off or don't share in the first place. But it's very easy for you to do that. Now, one of the questions that gets asked quite a lot is, when should I run my characterizations? And this will depend on who you are. As a supplier, if a customer is saying that they have OneRoster data, you could run it through Compatibility Check here and run it through OneRoster Check just to make sure that it's conformant before you even begin the process of onboarding them. Consider it a dry run to make sure that their data is ready, because the tool is going to give you a great report back on how their data is structured and how ready it is, how conformant it is to the spec. For districts, it really depends on how you want to use the tool. As you saw at the beginning, this is one multi-tool for you. It's a superpower that we give you to really enable you to see into your data transparency, into your conformance of your data, make sure that it is as ready as it can be so you can be digital on day one. And so maybe you'd run it early in the spring. Why in the spring? Because it gives you time to talk to your sys vendor to resolve any issues you find before the back-to-school rush. Maybe you'd run it in the summer when you've closed out the one school year and you're opening up that new school year and go, great, let's see if all our systems are lining up. Let's make sure our configuration's working correctly. Another time you might want to run it is when you're told by your sys vendor that they've performed a system update. They've told you it shouldn't have changed anything, but you can come in here and check, make sure the data that you're exporting hasn't in some way been affected by their update. Another reason you might want to do it is if you do any kind of post-processing or any kind of filtering, because the benefit of compatibility check is it gives you an easy way to check what you're doing, those filters that you've set up, those restrictions you've put in, see if they're really working. Has it removed that field that you didn't want to share? Is that metadata appearing and being populated the way you want it to be? These are all great use cases for quickly hopping into compatibility check and running one of those characterizations. If you do end up with a lot of them here, you can always click the delete button and it removes it from the list, so you don't have to be overwhelmed by them. But it's a really good idea to run them where it fits in with your method of working. It's not a hoop you have to jump through. It's that superpower you've got just to make sure everything's working correctly. So that gave you a quick overview of OneRoster compatibility check and how characterization can make sure that a provider's data is conformant and what they want to share. That's really important. Then you've seen how comparisons allow vendors to share information with you. They can include notes about how data should be structured, how they use metadata, but also tell you what metadata they're expecting or if they have any specific requirements. All of that's shown to you in an easy to read report. And as I showed you earlier, you get good error reporting. When things go well, you'll get a check mark. And like this, again, that traffic light metaphor, where you see the alerts, you can drill in and find out what was happening. For example, in this case, you're oversharing metadata. But there's ways that you can really use these reports to make sure things are going to work before you send that first file over. It's also a very useful way to find out what areas you need to focus on during testing, because you can use these alerts as a key to say, okay, we need to check that this hasn't caused a problem. We need to make sure that this is imported correctly. So it's a good tool there to cover a lot of different scenarios, checking your conformant, checking your work with vendors, or for the suppliers to be able to make sure your customers are ready before you start onboarding them, answering those early back and forth questions of, could you fix this in your data before you even get to having them? But that's just one part of what's in compatibility check. We also have common cartridge check. And this is functionality that was released earlier this year that performs characterization style checking of metadata within common cartridges. Why did we do this? Well, common cartridges, as we know, are very widely used in the community and are a great way of sharing resources and content, curriculum content, and instructional materials. But there's always that question of, will it work with my LMS? Will it work with my law? Does it contain the information that we asked for? For example, we've been told by the vendor that this cartridge is translated into 5 languages. Are all 5 of them in there like we expected? Does the content align with my state standards? When it aligns with my standards, does it actually meet the needs that I have? So can I look at individual resources and see what they're aligned with? All of these questions can be answered with common cartridge check. Again, a quick dashboard and that easy to use process. Select the specification, give it a name, select a provider. Add some notes, and then identify the file. Again, if it's hosted at a location, you can identify that there, or you can upload the file. Same as with OneRoster, we're not retaining your data. We are not keeping a copy of the cartridge. What we're doing is very quickly uploading it scanning it, performing our analysis, and then deleting that. We just keep the analysis. It's very important to make that clear because we know that with cartridges, there are rights, usage restrictions, etc. We are not using it, viewing it, retaining it in any way. Once you're done, hit Submit Characterization. Click that big green easy button. Now, obviously, with cartridges, this can take a little bit longer depending on the size of your cartridge. If you've got a thick common cartridge, for want of a better term, a regular common cartridge, and it's got a lot of video in it and it's gigabytes of data, it's going to take a while to upload. But don't worry, the process runs the same. And you can walk away, do something else, close the browser window. The report will appear when it's completed in your screen here. So, as you can see, this one didn't take too long. And we can see we had a conformant cartridge. But what kind of information do we get in it? Well, we can dig in and we can see. We can see the table of contents. Now, this is something you could see in your law or you could see in your LMS, but in both of those situations, it would have been translated by a tool. Here, we are literally showing you the structure as defined in the manifest of the cartridge. And that's really important because it gives you a clear view of what's going on. You could type in and search for certain keywords or information within there, and it will show you the results for that. In this case, I started typing the word nano, and oddly enough, nanotechnology is a keyword within this item. And that's important to allow you to spot check content. But content's just a part of the puzzle. If we scroll down here, you can see the available standards. And this is where things start to get more exciting. Because here you can see a long list of standards, and we've all seen this if you've looked at a cartridge. A lot of cartridge suppliers will populate with multiple states worth of standards in there. But you want to know, how do they relate to content? Because if you see, like with this row here, resources 0, the standard's been included at the manifest level, but it's not been tagged to any resources. Now, this means that it's covered by the cartridge, but if you're looking to use those resources in individualized learning plans or adaptive learning, and you want to be able to track a specific resource to a specific standard, you're going to have a problem with some of these standards. So it's a good way of you checking, how is your vendor providing this information? How do suppliers do this? And for suppliers, you can check to make sure the content's aligning the way you want it to. Once in there, you could search a number of ways. If they've loaded in multiple states like we see here, you could type in that key to the start of your state and filter it down until you get just your state standards. And that's really useful. Here you can see a standard and a case network link as well. Alternatively, you could type in a keyword. And again, search for that standard. It could be a keyword, it could be standards text, any part of the standards information. In this case, you can see I was typing in the start of the word molecules, and we're going to find that hidden in here somewhere. There we go. So it's giving you multiple ways of spot checking the standards that you need are in here, and they're aligned with the content you need. So you can drill in and go, great, the standard I need is here, and I can see there are multiple resources aligned with it. You could then drill further into those resources and see the educational metadata that's been included about them, but also search back from there and see the other standards they align with. As you just saw me touch on there, resources are listed individually as well. So you can drill in, search for specific resources. Again, type in words that occur within the metadata, and we can pull those results. Here I typed in photosynthesis. We start to get photosynthesis web activities. It's a great way of checking that everything you expect within a cartridge is there. So whether you're a supplier producing cartridges, you're a district who's purchased a cartridge, or you're a district that's generating your own cartridges, all of you can use this tool to check that it contains what you expect. The final level is the manifest metadata itself. And this can be useful for verifying things such as languages, translations, descriptions are all populated correctly. So for spot checking, it's a great way of being able to dig in, see what's going on. And that gives you a flying view through Common Cartridge Check and OneRoster Check. And it's been great to show you both of these. But now we get back to, we completed the live demo successfully. So let's get to a Q&A. Does anybody have any questions from anything that you've seen today? Don't be shy. Okay, nobody's speaking up straight away, so I'll ask a question for you. How do I get involved with Compatibility Check? This looks excellent. That's a very good question, Ian. The way that you get involved is, if you're an IMS member, you already are involved. Compatibility Check's available to all IMS members, and you can contact me directly or speak with your usual IMS contact, whether that's Lisa, who's also on this call today, or whichever team that you interact with regularly. Tell them that you're interested, they'll put you in touch, and we're happy to onboard you. There are other ways. If you're a supplier, please talk to us about other ways that you can become involved with Compatibility Check. We're always eager to talk to people. What's coming up in the future? As you can imagine, we're looking to include OneRoster 1.2, and we're also looking at bringing in additional functionality, linking into trusted apps and other standards as we move forward. But again, if you're sat there thinking, oh, this looks amazing, but I just wish it did X, please give me a call, let us know, shoot me an email. We're always looking for ideas from the community, because one of the core goals for us on the Compatibility Check team is to make this a tool for the community. It's to help you answer the questions that you have and solve any problems you might be seeing. So thank you again for attending this session. I can see we're finishing nicely on time for a change. Does anybody have any last questions? You can see my contact information there if you want to reach out to me afterwards. This session has been recorded and will be available on the IMS website shortly. But please, does anybody have anything before we wrap up this session? Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for your time today. And I look forward to talking with you all in the future. Thank you very much and have a wonderful remainder of your day.